All right, let's keep on going. We have more amazing content, and I'm really, really excited about the next speaker because I'm going to share the stage with them for maybe 2 minutes. But I've shared the stage with them a couple of times, mostly at karaoke. And this person is really passionate about speaking about React, about JavaScript, about testing. I actually see them a lot over on the conference circuit. But if you really want to see them get extra passionate, maybe give them a few hot takes about your favorite superheroes, because they have a lot to say. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce the developer advocate from OLX, who's going to give us a nerdy guide to the web trending concepts. We have the one, the only, Daniel Afonso. Let's give it up.
Okay, finally we have slides. Let's do this thing. Okay, hello React Brussels. Thank you so much for having me. How are you all doing? Okay, I need some energy here. How are you all doing? Okay, so I'm gonna need energy from you in a bit more. But let's start this talk. First things first. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to all of you with this talk, which is going to be the first time I'm doing it live, so I gotta admit I'm a bit nervous, but hopefully you all enjoy it and have as much fun as I did preparing it. So let's start with this AI-built image. Seems pretty cool. I asked for Batman and Spider-Man presenting a tech talk, and that's what it got me. So there's a reasoning for this. The reason is going to conferences can be a bit overwhelming. It's super fun. We learn a bunch of things, but sometimes a thing that I personally experienced in this circuit and happening here is there are so many words, so many pop words, so many stuff that you hear that not often you understand what the heck they mean. I'll explain. The reason is you don't always have the right mental models for them formed. Now, what are mental models? Well, mental models are like the things, the concepts, the steps that you associate whenever you hear a word. For instance, if I say sleeping, all of you in your mind have all the steps associated with sleeping. And this is what I felt I was missing with these topics and with these words that I was hearing in conferences. Now, I'm going to stop this in a bit to tell you something about myself. I'm a huge comic book nerd. I have more comic books than I can read at this point. I actually have all of these ones as well. And I thought a bit, what if I could pick up these topics that I really love, these comics that I like, these topics that I still don't quite understand yet, but I wish I did, and together I built a nerdy guide to the web trending concepts. So let's start by introducing myself real quickly. I'm Daniel Afonso. I'm working as a developer advocate at OLX. I'm an A.R.G.U.S instructor, an Altier ambassador, and you can call me on this thing now called X or whatever, and any social media at the end of Daniel GC Afonso. Another thing about myself, I just published a book recently about state management with React Query. So if you like React Query or want to talk about it as well, I'm all up for it. I super love this thing. So let's start this talk with just a quick disclaimer, by the way. We're going to see some characters that are owned by Marvel, some characters that are owned by DC. I don't own these things. I just use them to help explain some concepts to all of you. So just putting this disclaimer out there. And another thing, I want to share some love. I want to thank Attila, which we're still going to be seeing on stage today. And I want to thank Mateus, because while I was preparing this talk, they gave me feedback on it, helped me review the mental models that we'll be doing and showing you today. So a lot of love to these two people, because without them, this talk wouldn't be what it is right now. So could I have an applause for them? Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, this dude has been speaking for 2 minutes, and I have no idea what is this talk. Well, you decide what this talk is going to be. And I'm here on stage, but this talk is going to have a flow. So I'm going to decide some topics I pre-built. And for each topic, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to show you two characters, one from Marvel and one from DC. And what I'm going to ask you is, for an applause, if you want to hear a character from Marvel, an applause if you want to hear a character for DC. And then, depending on the character that you choose, I'm going to tell you a comic book story. And in that comic book story, there's going to be some concepts, technical concepts, to explain those terms. And after we finish the comic book story, I'll do the technical review. So we'll have some fun first, and then we go to the technical aspects. I have a challenge to all of you. While I'm telling the story, try to pick up and see, OK, oh, if I know this concept, let's see what is it telling me on this slide. Because pretty much everything that you'll be seeing here has a reasoning. And if you like comic books, there's also some interesting bits there for comic book nerds as well. So this talk is for all the audiences in general. So let's start. Now, during this presentation, we're going to see three topics. We'll start with a story about hydration. So we're going to learn a bit more about what this thing is called hydration. Then we'll go to another word, another term that it took me a while to understand what it meant, because as a non-native English speaker, sometimes words are confusing, and fine-grained reactivity was one of them. And then we'll wrap up the talk with resumability. So these are the three things that you'll have a story for each, and each story will help you build the mental models for these things. So let's start with hydration. Now, for hydration, I'm going to ask the help of two characters. We're going to have a story with Iron Man, or we're going to have a story with Lex Luthor. So this is the part that you decide. I'm going to ask you for applauses who wants to hear Iron Man, and for applauses who wants to hear Lex Luthor. So who wants to hear Iron Man? OK. And now who wants to hear Lex Luthor? OK. It feels like Iron Man won this one, so let's start. OK, so now I'll be assuming the narrator role. So this might be a bit weird or tricky, but let's figure out this together. So let's tell a story. After building Mark I, Mark II, and Mark III, Tony Stark knew something. Doing this process by hand was quite slow. It took him a while. Getting the process and doing it by himself, it was not something that he wanted to do. He wanted this process to be faster. So he thought about something new. What if he picked up his custom AI, Friday, and taught Friday the steps to building his new armor? Interesting. And so he did. Now that was left after this was asking Friday to start building the thing. Now Friday plugged into the manufactory and started building the armor. And after a while, yep, the armor was ready. Success, we had a new suit. We can take it for a run. So Tony said, let's try this thing up. He tried to get on the suit. Apparently something didn't work. He couldn't get in it. The suit was not powering up. It was not interactive at all. And this was left Tony to think. So sitting up there with a non-interactive suit, he thought for a bit until an idea popped up into his mind. Maybe if he downloaded Friday into the suit, Friday would be able to power it up from the inside. Interesting. So Friday, please download yourself into the armor. Let's try to see if this works. And Friday did. We had to wait. We had to wait for a bit. And after a while, yep, the download was completed. Now the armor had Friday running up on it. So it was up to Friday to start up, and as it was going, to power up each part of the armor. Now, hopefully you can see this very good GIF that I did in a couple of minutes. But as Friday was going up, it was powering up the armor from the inside. And now, finally, the armor was ready. We had a new suit. We can take this for a run. So Tony got into it, powered up the thrusters. And apparently, this time didn't go well. But oh well, that's timing. But yeah, did you all catch the steps that are associated with hydration on this thing? Let's just recap them real quickly. Now, on the technical part, hydration is created to serve a problem. The problem is server-side rendered code needs interactivity. What happens is when you're server-side rendering your code, you have your static HTML. And then the client gets the page. Now, what happens when the client gets the page is that the page is not immediately interactive. So what we need to do on the browser, we need to download the JavaScript, we need to download the framework, we need to run it, and afterwards, the framework is going to do this process which is called reconciliation, where it's going to attach interactivity, event handlers, and all of those things to the HTML. And now, finally, you're going to have an interactive page. And this is the gist of how hydration works. How did this fit into the story? Now, let's do this together. So in the beginning, Tony had an issue. The first issue was he was still doing everything on the client side. So he needed a new process. He was building the armor by himself. So in the beginning, we figured out, OK, client-side rendering is a bit slow. So we moved into the next step, which is, let's teach the framework to build a page. Now, the framework knows how to build a page. So if we have the framework to do the page, on the server side, using the framework, we can build the new static HTML. So in this case, we're building the new armor. Now, we soon got to another scenario where, OK, now we have the armor, but there's one problem. There was a problem setting up here, which was the server-side rendered code was not interactive. So if you remember in the beginning, Tony tried to get into the armor, and that thing didn't work out because the armor was not interactive. So we needed to do something different. So what if we download the framework and have it turn static HTML into interactive HTML? So we have the framework going on inside and power up that thing. So we did. We had to wait for a bit, but after a while, the client got the framework. And as the framework was going over the HTML, it was attaching event handlers and logic needed to run every matching node. And this was pretty much the steps that we saw during this thing. And after a bit, yep, the page was now fully interactive. So this was hydration with the help of Tony Stark. Let's hope you're having fun, because I'm having a ton of fun here. Let's just recap what the heck we saw here. So we had the first problem, which was server-side rendered code needed interactivity. Once the client requested the page, using the framework on the server side, we built the static HTML and sent it to the client. But this is once the issue starts that we just need hydration, which is now the client needs to wait for the framework to download. And once we get the framework goes over the HTML and does that thing of attaching the event handlers and runs the reconciliation process. After a bit, the page was now fully interactive. So hopefully, you all like this thing. If you didn't, well, I can't do much, but let's go to the next topic. Let me just click here. OK, the link works. Now, fine-grained reactivity. And sorry for the bad transition. I wish I had a better transition for the topics, but, well, it's different things. For fine-grained reactivity, we're going to have two characters to help us. So we can go with the Watchers, Watu, the Watcher, or we can go with Batman when he's set on the Mobius chair after the Darkseid War. So this is where I'm going to need your help once again. Who wants the Watu and the Watchers? OK, and now who wants Batman? OK. I kind of figured out that's where this is going. So let's see Batman. OK, created by the Anti-Monitor, and now in the ownership of Batman after the Darkseid War, the Mobius chair allows its user to travel to time and dimensions. Now, Bruce could see it all. He could see all that has passed, all that is passing, and all that will pass. How does he do that? With the help of this thing called time points and time derivations. Now, time points are the blue things, and time derivations are the gray ones. What are they, you might be thinking? Well, as you might be inclined to think, time points are what the name inclines, are points in time. They are points in time where critical events in history happen. On the other side, time derivations are, well, alternatives to time points where sometimes you need to check what's going to happen when you perform some changes or if you change a timeline. So time derivations are expensive alternatives to a time point where you can apply some changes just to figure out what would happen if you change the timeline. Now, Batman knew something. And what he knew was, I won't change the past. There's too much stuff there. He doesn't want to do this. But the present and the future, that's a completely different story. Because every time a time point changes or something happens, they tell Batman. The time points will let Batman know that something happened. And thanks to this, Bruce can make sure that nothing bad will happen to those he loves and to this world. So, for instances, if the rogues are attacking Central City, what Batman will do is he will send the Flash. Once Flash goes in, fixes the issue, a time point changes, a time derivation changes as well. If for some reason, well, Mr. Freeze is attacking Ace Chemicals or robbing Ace Chemicals, let's send Robin and Red Hood. And they go ahead, they take care of the issue, and we change the time point and the time derivation. So if now looking into the future, because we've been into the present, what if we figured out, okay, well, metal will attack the daily planet somewhere, somehow in the future? Just on prevention, let's send our friend Superman to take care of that thing. And at this point, once again, as you might figure it out, a time point changes, and the time derivation does as well. And this continued for too long. Now, soon Batman was obsessed with stopping even ordinary crime before it happened. This is based on an original comic book story, and what happened back then was Gotham City Police didn't have any more space on jail anymore because they were locking up people even before they committed the crimes. Yeah, crazy. Now, soon, this quickly took a toll on Bruce. You see, the Mobius chair was made for gods, and Batman, even though as amazing he was just a regular human. Well, if you want to know more a bit about this story and what the heck this will transition into, you can know more about in Justice League, the issue 42 from 2015 after the Darkseid War. But so far, we just went through kind of all the things associated with fine-grained reactivity. Exciting. So before we jump into fine-grained reactivity, let's just understand something. What is this thing called reactivity? Well, reactivity is a program. Oops, I went ahead. Let me just go back. Reactivity is a programming pattern that lets you set a behavior that will automatically react to data changes. Now, when you say that you have a fine-grained reactivity, it's pretty much when you have a reactivity pattern that's built on top of a set of primitives: signals, effects, and memos. And these were the things we saw on the history. Another thing that's important to know here, that these primitives allow the framework to know exactly where the update needs to happen. And this also means that the framework will not need to run a code to determine updates. There's going to be one talk today from Attila to talk about VDOM and stuff with Solid, so he'll explain a bit more this part in the future. But let's just recap what are these things associated with fine-grained reactivity. Let's start with signals. Now, signals are event emitters at its essence. They have getters, they have setters, and they hold a value. So what we're seeing here, it's not React, it's Solid.js. So Solid.js is one of the frameworks that is probably the most fine-grained one, I guess. There's also a graph. I think Attila has that on his slides as well. Well, let's not continue this. So signals allow you to hold a value. It has a counter. Let me just click here. So that's not the drawing I wanted to do. I want the laser. OK, cool. So you have a signal. You create a signal. You give it a value. It returns a counter. It returns a setter. Using that counter, you can attach it to the DOM. And what this will do is it will make sure that Solid doesn't need to run any code to check if the framework needs to update or the DOM needs to update. What's going to happen is, because this is a signal, it will tell Solid that when something changes to the signal, that it needs to change this thing. And it's all thanks to the other part, which are effects. Effects are functions that subscribe to signals. Every time a signal changes, you can execute an effect. Now, you can have implicit or explicit effects. In here, I'm using both. So you can have an explicit effect by calling create effect, and you pass it a function. And what we're doing here is we're logging the count is now count. And this means that every time the count changes, this effect will run, because Solid does automatic dependency tracking. And it will track, OK, this thing changes, so there's no need for dependency arrays or all those things. Once the count changes, this function is called, it logs. And this is pretty much how you do an explicit effect. Now, on the other side, there are implicit effects. And this is something that people that are using Solid sometimes forget as well, which is you have count, and you have a signal attached to it. Now, I told you, there's no VDOM, there's no tracking how things change. What happens here is every time this signal changes, Solid has an effect that will run and update this specific part of the UI. And this means that there's no need for re-rendering or whatever. This thing just changes. And the other part, it's memos. So memos allow you to cache the right values on its essence. So imagine that we had this function, double num, that is being called a lot of times. Now, this function here is not very heavy. We're just doing count times 2. But if this function was very heavy, then probably calling it a bunch of times in a row might take some impact to our code. So what we do here is we can wrap this function with create memo. And what it will do pretty much is run the function once, cache the result, and until the signal inside of it changes, every time it's called, it's going to give you the result immediately. And these are the things we saw on the talk. So we started with setting up what time points and time derivations are. In this case, what I was trying to put out was that time points are signals. They contain a point in time, which in this case is a value. And then we had time derivations, which are quite expensive to calculate. And they, in this case, would be MIMOs. They have their derivations of what a time point would be. On the other side, we had effects. Every time something happening on the timeline, everything happens, changed to time point, there was this effect that was running and letting Batman know, hey, look, this thing is going to change, or this thing is changing. And this meant that with these effects, every time a time point, which was a signal, changed, Batman would get notified and would update it by running another effect. This also meant that once that time point changed again, the MIMO would be recreated, so the time derivation would be recreated. And that's why all those animations of jiggling time points and whatsoever. So to recap, let's recap fine-grained reactivity. It's a reactivity pattern built on top of these networks, and primitive network of primitives, signals, effects, and MIMOs. Signals are event emitters. They have getters, they have setters, and they hold a value. Effects are functions that subscribe to these signals and run every time a signal changes. Another thing, MIMOs, they allow you to cache these derived values. And this was fine-grained reactivity, and now we're going for the last one. How much time I have? Okay, I have 5 minutes, so we have time for the last one. Resumability. Now, this will come a bit, a story will pick up a bit after the last one that we just saw. The last one we just saw with hydration, but don't worry, even though the characters are the same, you can still pick another one, or you can still pick the same. The choice is yours. So, we're going to have Iron Man, or we're going to have Lex Luthor. So, I'm kind of guessing where this will go, but I want to run this by you again. So, who wants Iron Man? Okay, who wants Lex Luthor? Oh, wow! So, you proved me wrong. Amazing. Now, how funny would it be if I didn't have the other story set up and I was trying to guess? No, let's go with Lex Luthor. Okay, so Lex finally did it. He finally defeated and captured Superman. It only cost him one thing, though. His war suit. Apparently, going against Superman is quite not something that you might like to do. Now, back in the office when with Superman captured, Lex wants to think about doing something different, so cloning might be a fun idea. This is the part where comic book nerds will think of Superboy. Okay, cool. If you didn't understand, it's okay. I explained it either way. So suddenly, back at the office, boom, an explosion happened. Something happened because apparently, well, Lex got startled and he asked, oh, okay, the animation, I forgot the animation here. Mercy, what happened? Mercy, it's his assistance. And apparently, the Justice League didn't like that Lex captured Superman. Figures out why, I don't know. But it startled Lex for a bit. And he needed time. He needed to make sure that he could do something, because remember, he doesn't have a suit anymore. That thing was destroyed. So he needs time to build a new war suit. So he just deployed the Lex bots and have the Lex bots taking care of this thing. At the same time, Lex knew something. He knew that the old process that he had, the process that he had built previously, would get him captured. Because, well, Justice League has this guy called the Flash, and he would probably be able to go over the building even before he was able to finish the suit. Even if Lex had Speed Force straps there. That's a completely different story. Oh well. So Lex went to the AI that he had. So Lex had just acquired the Kryptonian ship, and from there he had an early version of Brainiac. And Brainiac was working as the AI that Lex had. So he knew that he needed a suit. He needed something fast. And Brainiac suggested this thing called resumable protocol. Now, Lex questioned, okay, but will this give me a suit faster than the old process that I had? And Brainiac said, yeah, it definitely will. And Lex thought, okay, but why didn't you offer me that before? And Brainiac thinks, okay, yeah, you didn't ask, but okay, stop talking, just build me the suit, start building that thing now. And Brainiac started building the suit. So there was something that changed from the process that Tony had before. And in this process, every time, Lex, sorry, script for the other one, Lex knew something different, because now when Brainiac was building the suit, he was encoding some special information. And there, for each part of this information, Brainiac would know that once it was going over the suit, he would be able to, well, know what to execute directly. Now, Brainiac also did something. It downloaded a very, very small portion of itself already to the ARMA, so it was already uploaded. And this part of himself was able to do a couple of things. You see, once you received an order, what this part of Brainiac would be able to do would be able to receive that order, intercept it, and run the operation needed. So this means, OK, if I want to open the suit, get inside, cool, now we have an interactive armor. It seems to be working out. Now, with the suit finally ready, Lex decided to, well, maybe going for a run might be better. I don't want to get captured by the Justice League, so let's do something different. Let's run away out of here. And Lex asked Brainiac to power the thrusters. You see, you need to fly, so the thrusters on the feet would be able to thrust him out of there and leave that thing without getting captured by the Justice League. So please start the thrusters. Brainiac received the order and said, OK, powering the thrusters. And after a while, the thrusters were ready. And this was when, yep, another explosion happened. There's a lot of explosions happening around these things. And Lex got worried. Explosions don't happen for a reason. Well, it means that in front of Lex, apparently the Justice League just showed up. They had rescued Superman. They were ready there to stop him. And yeah, it seems like Lex is not going anywhere. So the rest is history. This is comic book world, so you have to wait for the next issue to figure out where this thing is going. So let's wrap up, and I'm getting over time, but let's wrap up to see what this thing is, resumability, what it is. Now, resumability is there to solve one issue, which is your page is not immediately interactive. That's why you need hydration. Now, during hydration, first we redo the work we did on server. Secondly, no hydration is better than having hydration. I stole this quote from Attila. Thank you. So having no hydration is better than having hydration. What happens when you're building resumability? So this got very popular with this thing called Quick. When you're doing hydration, you statically generate the stuff on the server, but now you serialize in some extra information. This means that once the client gets the page is immediately interactive. Now, it doesn't need to download all the JavaScript and run reconciliation because it does something different. Remember, it serializes this information. And when it's serializing the information, it's telling it, OK, this is the JavaScript you're going to be needing for running this specific part. And once you do it, so in this case, once we click it, we're going to download the JavaScript for executing that specific part. So to recap, what we saw on the story was, first, hydration is slow. That's what we were trying to set up here. Secondly, we had another thing, which is, OK, the client needs a page, so it needs a new suit. And using the framework, the server would build this new HTML. But it was serializing in all the information. And this information serialized, it's used to help resume the execution we had on the server back on the client. This meant that once the client got the page, it was immediately interactive. Now, I also mentioned something, which was Brainiac was downloading a very partial version of itself to the armor. In the real world, this thing is called the quick loader. The quick loader is a very small bit of JavaScript that also comes with the page that does this thing, which is set up a global listener to all the events. And when the user clicks on something, the quick loader will intercept the event, download the JavaScript needed for it, and executing it. And this is pretty much what resumability does. So let's recap real quickly. Problem. Page is not immediately interactive. No hydration is better than having hydration. So what we do, whenever a client requests a page on the server, using the framework, we build this HTML page and serialize in all the information we're going to need to resume execution in a new environment. The client will get the page, and now it's immediately interactive. Secondly, the client also gets this thing called the quick loader, which is responsible for whenever there's a global listener, to set up a global listener, and whenever there's an event, quick loader will intercept it, get the JavaScript needed for executing it, and run it. And now we're definitely on the end of this talk. So what's the next topic? Well, I'll leave that up to you. I would love to continue doing this talk in a bunch of different ways and blog posts and YouTube videos or whatever, but for that, I would love you to suggest me things. I would love you to tell me, OK, I would love a nerdy guide on this thing if you like this topic. If you didn't, well, that's life. Hopefully, you had as much fun as I did. So stay tuned for the next time I run this thing, and that was a fun animation. And this was a nerdy guide to the web trending concepts.
Wow. I don't think a talk has ever triggered my inner nerd more so than that. Also, can we just call out Batman in the God of Knowledge chair when he asks about the identity of the Joker? It's one of my favorite comic book moments in history. Thank you. We've had amazing talks. We've had this one.